Hey, I'm Sandy Ggirl. Welcome back to this Setting Boundaries workshop. Today is part 4. Parts 1, 2, and 3 are all posted on YouTube if you want to go back and see what you missed. Okay, so this material was created out of an inspiration from my work in the addictions field. It is created for general use, however, so hopefully it's going to be of benefit for everybody. If you want to check out my services, you can do so at ggirllifestyle.com. So this particular installment, we're talking about the 2 parts of boundary setting, what to avoid, how assertiveness comes into play with this, dealing with discomfort around setting boundaries, and cultivating self-acceptance and how that's important for this as well. So here we go. Now that we have clarity about the boundaries that we would like to set, let's talk about how we can actually set them. Setting boundaries can be a scary prospect. However, if we have a thorough understanding of what the process entails, we might find it a little easier. So as mentioned, the 2 parts of boundary setting, here we go. So those 2 parts are communication and action. Communication is defined as the exchange of information-laden messages between a sender and a receiver. Context, tone, and body language all combine to express the true meaning of what we're saying. This means that the person we're talking to has to interpret what we're saying, and we have to interpret what they say in response. This series of interpretations opens opportunities for miscommunication, however. If our goal is mutual understanding, it's important that we enter the conversation with kindness and an openness to different perspectives. This is especially true when we're setting boundaries. We want to be sure our boundaries and the needs they reflect are understood, so it's vital that we speak clearly, honestly, and kindly. Boundary statements begin with I need, I want, or I expect, such as, I need you to call before you come over, or I want you to stop asking questions about my private life when we are in public. Finally, I expect that you will return this by the time we have agreed upon. So these are all parts of step 1 around communication. Step 2 is action. Step 2 is sticking to the boundaries you've set with action. This is the only way to show others that you're serious about your boundaries. Boundaries are about you, not the other person, so the action should always be something that you will do. Example actions in response to boundary violations could be, for the call before you come over, if there is a boundary violation around that, you can stop answering the door. If there's a boundary violation for stop asking questions about my private life when we're in public, you could maybe choose to stop going public places with them. If there's a boundary violation around the request to return something by the time that was agreed upon, maybe you want to consider stopping loaning items to that person. What to avoid? There are many ways for us to set our boundaries appropriately and a few ways we can get it wrong. Let's go through some of the things we want to avoid when setting boundaries, including making excuses, being passive, aggressive, or passive-aggressive. Finally, manipulation. It's another thing we want to avoid. Making excuses, we're starting there. Excuses give the other person the opportunity to argue with you or try to resolve the barrier your excuses present. For example, imagine an acquaintance asks you out to dinner this weekend. You aren't a big fan of this person and would rather not spend more time with them than is necessary. If you say, "No, I can't. I have a lot of work to catch up on this weekend," you present them with the opportunity to counter with, "Well, what about next weekend?" thus rendering your excuse invalid. Now imagine the same situation, but instead of offering an excuse, you politely say, "No, thank you." By keeping it simple and straightforward, you have set a clear and effective continuous boundary. avoiding being passive, aggressive, or passive aggressive. Finding the right balance of assertiveness and grace is something that comes with time and practice. Though it is best to avoid it, many of us will likely set a boundary from one of these three stances at some point. Let's talk about what each of these stances are and how they influence boundary setting. Avoiding being passive. Being passive is essentially denying our needs. When we are being passive, we ignore our needs and allow others to dictate what we do or what happens to us without speaking up for ourselves. We often take the passive stance when we're trying to avoid vulnerability, conflict, or rejection. Passivity might look like not saying anything when we have an issue, letting people do or say hurtful things, or ignoring things that trigger us, all of which are in opposition to setting clear boundaries. Being aggressive. Aggressive communication typically involves trying to hurt someone or verbally attacking them. It's loud, harsh, and inconsiderate. Communicating from this stance can sometimes feel powerful. We feel that if we can get big and scary, others will acquiesce to our demands. However, underneath the aggression is fear and vulnerability. When we approach boundary setting from an aggressive stance, we can damage our relationship with the other person, or lose their respect, or provoke unnecessary and counterproductive conflict. Finally, passive aggressiveness. We want to avoid that as well. This type of communication is the acting out of our feelings while denying how we feel. For example, being snippy or cold to someone while insisting that nothing's wrong. Passive aggression is said to be the _1 way we communicate our feelings and needs. It allows us to avoid confrontation and vulnerability by indirectly communicating our needs with our actions rather than with our words. That is, we assume that the other person will understand what feelings we are expressing through our actions, figure out what they've done wrong, and behave differently the next time. Passive aggressiveness. We might feel that it's obvious we're angry at our friend for bailing on the party because we're acting upset, or that our partner should be able to infer that we need more time with them by the way we react when they tell us about their plans with other people. The trouble is, it isn't obvious and they can't. Though we're certainly entitled to our feelings, we can't allow our boundary setting to stop there. Setting clear boundaries and giving the other person the opportunity to respect them requires that we use our words. Okay, now we're covering manipulation. This can be an effective way to get others to do what you want them to do, but manipulating someone is not the same as setting boundaries. Manipulation is a common strategy that we might not even be aware that we're using. For example, when we respond with puppy dog eyes and a desperate please to the no we just heard, we're using guilt to manipulate the other person into doing what we asked of them. Making someone feel bad until they give in may be an effective form of manipulation, but it isn't the only one to look out for. Here are a few other examples of manipulation. Gaslighting, withholding affection, making a situation seem urgent when it isn't, withholding part or all of the truth, and trying to evoke pity. Being assertive. Assertiveness can sometimes feel like we're being mean or bossy. Women in particular may be subject to this perspective as they're commonly labeled as aggressive, pushy, or cold when they're being assertive. However, being assertive is not the same as being overbearing. It's honestly and unapologetically communicating your needs. Communicating assertively is the healthiest way to set boundaries. Unfortunately, assertive communication can be exceptionally challenging. To be assertive, ideally, we remember that we're entitled to advocate for ourselves. As we work on communicating assertively, there are 4 tips we can keep in mind to help us. Know yourself, be empathetic, start soft, and make no apologies. Let's explore these. Knowing yourself. In many ways, being assertive is being true to yourself. In order to be true to yourself, however, you have to know who you are. Confidence in what our needs and expectations are is essential to assertively setting and keeping our boundaries. If we're setting boundaries when we aren't quite sure about ourselves, we may project the sense that our boundaries are flimsy or negotiable. Research suggests that confidence comes from an accurate perception of ourselves. Many of us hold an image of ourselves that focuses on our weaknesses and flaws rather than seeing the whole picture as it really is. The inaccurate perception of ourselves limits our ability to communicate confidently and assertively. As we discussed in part 3, we can gain self-knowledge through mindfulness and reflecting on our thoughts, feelings, and priorities. Be empathetic. The ability to feel and express empathy is essential for communicating assertively. Teresa Wiseman identified 4 components to empathy. These components include: number 1, being able to see the world as others see it. 2, being non-judgmental. 3, understanding the feelings of another person. And 4, communicating your understanding of another person's feelings. Being empathetic and holding space for another person's perspective allows us to communicate in a way that's compassionate yet firm. Additionally, by expressing our understanding of the other person's feelings, we demonstrate that we believe that their feelings and perspective are valid, even if we disagree. Start soft. According to Gottman and Nelson, a soft start is one in which we begin a conversation with gratitude or a compliment, and without judgment or criticism. When we enter a difficult conversation in a calm, respectful, and open manner, we reduce the need to feel defensive and increase the probability that the conversation will be productive and empathetic. Beginning a hard conversation with softness and openness also improves our chances of reaching a mutual understanding. Most of us make this mistake. We feel bad communicating our boundaries assertively. We worry that we will come across as selfish, so we say, "I'm so sorry, but I don't have the time to help with that." Cushioning what we say with an apology implies that we think we're doing something wrong or that we don't really need that boundary we're trying to set. However, despite what we may have been taught, having wants and needs is not bad or selfish. Feeling guilty after assertively setting a boundary may be unavoidable, but if we want to be taken seriously, we need to drop the apology. This exercise is an opportunity to work on your assertiveness. With a friend or partner, read through the following scenarios and practice addressing each one from an assertive perspective. You can take turns playing each role if you want, and give each other feedback on how you feel the conversation went and what could be done differently to improve the outcome of the conversation. So here are these scenarios. First one, person A and person B are co-workers. They generally get along well, but person B has recently started to pawn off the work they don't want to do onto person A without asking if they have the time or the desire to take on additional work. Number 2. Person A and person B are family members. Person A is usually very happy to spend time with person B, but lately person B has been asking person A intrusive questions in front of the other people. Person B's behavior has made person A start to dread family functions. Scenario 3. Person A and B are long-term friends. They've grown up together and know basically everything about each other. Person B has a tendency to use her intimate knowledge of person A to embarrass them in front of other people just for a laugh. When person A gets upset about the behavior of person B usually just writes them off, saying they were only joking. And the last scenario. Person A is the leader of their organization. They are new to the leadership position and have so far been very open to the feedback and suggestions from other people in their organization. Person B has been a member of this organization for longer than person A, but person B is not in a leadership position. Person B has been taking advantage of person A's openness and has essentially been issuing commands rather than offering opinions. So we have some professional scenarios and some personal scenarios that you can maybe journal around how you would approach it, or do the role playing with a partner or a friend and get to share opinions and switch up the roles. Dealing with discomfort. Setting boundaries, especially when we're new to it, is going to be uncomfortable. However, we can learn to manage the way we respond to the discomfort and to deal with those emotional responses appropriately. Managing how intensely we feel our emotions and how we respond to those emotions is called emotion regulation. We can engage in emotion regulation before, during, and after an emotionally charged experience. There are several effective strategies for regulating our emotions, such as mindfulness, reappraisal, and physical exercise. Let's take a look at these. Starting with mindfulness. As discussed in part 3, mindfulness is the non-judgmental, non-reactive, and open-hearted observation of our thoughts and feelings. This practice can help us to notice and identify our bodily sensations, which have been shown to facilitate emotion regulation. Reappraisal. This refers to changing how you view a situation and the meaning you derive from it. It's generally thought that reappraisal is a strategy that occurs prior to the experience of emotion. So you're getting ahead of the emotion. For example, starting your day with gratitude when you know you have an unpleasant meeting later in the day. Focusing on gratitude shifts your attention away from the negative aspects of the day and onto the positive aspects. This makes the dreaded meeting feel much less unpleasant. Physical exercise. There's now a wealth of research demonstrating the benefits of physical exercise for our mental health and well-being. One of the main reasons for this relationship is the effect of exercise on emotion regulation. Research has shown that regular exercise is associated with a decrease in symptoms of depression and anxiety, and an increase in emotional resilience or the ability to decrease the severity of negative emotions. While it's still a dismissive turn of phrase, the idea that you can walk it off may have some merit. Whether you are anticipating an uncomfortable conversation or dealing with the emotional aftermath from one, exercise can be a helpful salve. Dealing with discomfort. While there are certainly more than 3 strategies for regulating our emotions, these are some of the most studied, most effective, and most accessible. Ideally, we could utilize all 3 at once, but even if we are only able to manage one at a time, we will be much better able to manage the discomfort that comes from setting boundaries. So, in incorporating what we just covered, think of ways in which you might apply these strategies that we just chatted about into your life. Do you have or do you want to start a mindfulness meditation practice? Or can you think of ways in which you might reappraise a negative situation? Do you have an exercise routine? So even incorporating one of these strategies can really help with emotion regulation and certainly help with setting boundaries. As you think through each strategy, consider in detail how you might incorporate them. The more specific you get about how you use these strategies, the more likely you are to succeed. Cultivating self-acceptance. Having low self-esteem can almost certainly make boundary setting more challenging, but there may be risks to having high self-esteem as well. High self-esteem may make us more vulnerable to criticism and rejection, which can also dissuade you from setting boundaries. You can think of self-esteem as a balloon. The more inflated it is, the easier it is to pop. That's why some researchers suggest that self-esteem in itself may be a dangerous concept that may reflect a dysfunctional and illogical evaluation of global worth. Some researchers and clinicians prefer to focus on a concept referred to as unconditional self-acceptance. This is the total acceptance of yourself regardless of whether or not you behave intelligently, competently, or correctly, and whether or not you are approved of or loved by others. When we accept ourselves unconditionally, we are less likely to be swayed by the opinions of others or influenced by the fear of rejection. Self-acceptance creates a condition in which we can approach boundary setting without fear or hesitation because we're neither so disapproving of ourselves that we feel we don't deserve boundaries, nor do we think so highly of ourselves that we fear being knocked off of our pedestal. Much of American culture centers around assigning ourselves value based on comparisons to other people and to arbitrary societal standards. Current research suggests that we can replace our interest in self-esteem with unconditional self-acceptance through mindfulness. Mindfulness in this context refers less to meditation and more to a cognitive state. A cognitive state of mindfulness is characterized by being able to hold multiple perspectives and being able to shift between them depending on the context. For example, imagine you had an important meeting that you'd forgotten about and you had to attend it entirely unprepared. For many, this might trigger a negative self-evaluation. You might tell yourself you're deficient in some way or that everyone thinks poorly of you now. A mindful approach would be to identify what lessons you've learned and consider how you can guard yourself against similar mistakes in the future. It might also include recognizing that this was a particularly challenging week for you and that you weren't able to operate at your fullest capacity. So having compassion for yourself. The mindful approach holds both your recognition and ownership of the mistake you made and an understanding of your limitations and the ways in which this could be a useful learning experience. So now we have an opportunity to do an exercise around this concept of mindful acceptance. Working with a partner or independently, think of a few example scenarios in which you failed to set or allowed a violation of your boundaries. These can be real examples or you can make a few up. For each example, consider how you responded to the event. How did you feel? What did you say to yourself? How do you feel about it now? When you're done, write out or discuss with your partner or a friend how you could view this situation from a perspective of mindfulness and self-acceptance. How would this perspective have changed the way you interacted or the way you felt about yourself? If you were to encounter the same situation again, how might unconditional self-acceptance and mindfulness change the outcome? So we're at the point of the summary of this part 4. In total, we learned that setting boundaries consists of both communication and action. There are some strategies for setting boundaries that are likely to be unsuccessful. Being assertive is the healthiest way to set boundaries. There are some helpful strategies we can employ for dealing with discomfort. Cultivating self-acceptance is a critical component of setting and maintaining boundaries. I thank you for joining me. Please like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. The next 2 slides are resources or references that were used to create this science-based material. I'm open to comments. I understand maybe you don't agree with everything that was shared today, and that's more than fine. I would be happy to hear what you have to say about it. So leave a comment. Discussion is always good. So stay tuned for the next 2 slides. Hope to see you again for part 5, which will be posted sometime next week. Thank you kindly and take care. So here's the first page of resources. I would suggest taking a screenshot if you want to do a deeper dive with it. And last page. Again, thanks for joining me. I hope this is helpful.